Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday, my favorite day of the week. If you're new to us, welcome to the Adobe Live Friday Masterclasses, which is a series that we put together for you to learn more about our products and get more of a deep dive. And it's led by all of the Adobe product evangelists. So you'll learn your various disciplines in Photoshop, photography, audio video with Jason Levine, Kyle Webster doing digital painting and drawing, and of course, Paul Tranny doing, I said Photoshop, but also graphic design, as well as Katrina doing Adobe Express. So it's a good action-packed Friday, and even if you can't stay the whole day, you can, of course, come back and watch the replays. Maybe you're watching a replay right now in the future, and I'm going to say hello and how are things in the future. But anyway, with that said, I got to stop telling that joke. That's getting old. Anyway, with that said, today we're going to take a look at something that I went back. I always go back and look at topics I've done before, and either I'll riff off those topics because, you know, they're old, like I hadn't done it in a while, or they were extremely popular. For example, when I did the Lightroom crash course, that one went over well, so I decided to do a Photoshop crash course. That went over well. So a lot of times a new topic is something that was just resurfaced from an older stream. And I went back and looked and saw that I hadn't done typography or for photographers in a long time. And even back when I did it, I probably didn't do it as well as I wanted to, because, you know, you always critique yourself and say, oh, I could have done this and I could have done that and I could have shown them this and I could have done better. So today I plan to do better. It's been a while since I talked about type, and I kind of revamped what I just glanced at what I did last time, but I think I'm going to do hopefully, if everything works, a better job today. And with that said, happy St. Patrick's Day. I believe that's today. So I saw someone say something about wearing green, and if I wear green, I'll blank myself out in the green screen, so I can't wear green. But anyway, with that said, if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, great. You guys can hang out over there. But if you want to take advantage of the main chat, then you can head over to b.net/Adobe Live. That's where I'll be looking at the chat the most. I'll try and look at both windows simultaneously, but the main chat is over on Behance. So with that said, let's talk about type. Let's talk about typography, not from a graphic design standpoint, even though we'll use some rules that all designers and people working with type should know. But we'll also take a look at type from a photography standpoint and the ways of augmenting your photography with typography. So with that said, let's pop over to the desktop. And let's talk about the three programs we always talk about, the three applications that you guys use on a regular basis and what you can and can't do in those applications when it comes to type. So starting with Lightroom Classic and Lightroom. Lightroom Classic and Lightroom have very limited type capabilities. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about it. I don't think that Lightroom has any type capabilities. I know Classic has some basic ones, but outside of exporting your image with a watermark with type on it, I don't know that Lightroom desktop, this version, the cloud version as some of you refer to it, I don't know that this version can do anything with type, not that I've ever seen. So if you're using the Lightroom desktop or Lightroom on your mobile devices, you have virtually no type capabilities in Lightroom. You'll have to take the image into something like Photoshop on iPad or Adobe Express, on your mobile devices and do it there. And same thing here, you would, if I needed to add type to a photo, I would just take the photo over into Photoshop. All right, but Lightroom Classic does have a couple more capabilities. Limited, very basic, and not what you're probably looking for, but let me explain what they are. So for example, I've got a photo here and I want to add some text to it. I got all this empty space over here that would be great for copy space, and I want to put some text there. Well, what can I do inside of Lightroom Classic? Virtually nothing. There's no type tool. If I head over to the develop module, there's no type tool. There's no, click and add text. If I head over to, now this is where I can get in and kind of fake it. If I head over to, for example, the book module, and I could get into some text capabilities there, because you do have the ability to add captions and add text and have books with type on them. And you can have text around your photo. And I think you can actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think you can drag text onto a photo. But anyway, you could kind of fake it with the book module. Slideshow module, not really going to help you there. And if you go up to the print module, you can have your text watermark, or I'm sorry, not watermark, but your identity plate down below. But you still, even if you try and drag it onto the photo, it goes behind it. It doesn't go on top of it. So you're kind of still stuck there without being able to add type. Now, some other things you can do, you can go in and somewhere in here, there should be something called photo info. I just never remember exactly where it is. Watermarking, font size. There it is, photo info. So photo info is checked off, but right now it's on caption and this photo doesn't have a caption. So if you go back to the metadata and add a caption, you can have that caption or custom text, in this case, be wherever you want. So if I wanted to change the custom text to her name, which is Justina, yeah, that's about it. And I still can't put that on top of the photo. So your type capabilities inside of Lightroom Classic even have never been great. Like, they've been good for making slideshows, making prints with type around it, but not actually putting type on the photo itself. So in this case, if you really wanted to do this, you would basically be taking it over to Photoshop. That's kind of where I'm just leading with this. But I wanted to let you know that you can put type around your photos with various modules, but not on top of the photo. All right, so let's pop back over. All right, so let's say I now want to put some text where I said, right on the photo, right on the copy space. Can't do it in Lightroom, can't do it in Lightroom Classic. Then what can I do? I can edit in Photoshop. So I usually do a Command E, but I'll just go ahead and show it to you in the menu, contextual menu, edit in Photoshop, and that will pop the image over into Photoshop, and then I can go to town, I can do whatever I want. So for example, Photoshop does have a type tool. I can click the letter T, or just hit the letter T on my keyboard to go to the type tool, and I can put text anywhere I want. Now, when you first click in the type tool in Photoshop, because I know a lot of people are new to Photoshop, or photographers that don't use Photoshop as much for typography, when you click, it will add some sample text, lorem ipsum. And that's, by the way, for those of you who are new to typography, you might be wondering, where does this text come from? What does this mean? What's this lorem ipsum stuff? It was designed to not be real words on purpose, not be words you would use, so that you wouldn't leave it on there by mistake. Because a lot of people, they mock up designs and they put where text is gonna go, even though they don't have the final text yet. And this just reminds them that, oh, you still need to put text there that needs to say what it actually needs to say. So they could style it, they could choose the right fonts, color, size, all that, to give the client an idea of what the text would look like in that spot, even though they don't have the actual text that's going to go there yet. So that's where lorem ipsum comes from. But let's say I can change that to Justina. Now, this particular font is a special font that is got its own colors in it. I'm going to switch to a non-color font. We're going to get back to this a little bit later, but let's just switch to, you know what? I have a long list of fonts. I'm not going to try and scroll through. I'm just going to type script. And when I type script, that will show me my various scripts that I can use. So I'm gonna try this Brass Script Pro. And now that I've got the Brass Script Pro there, I can go ahead. Now it's black because, like I said, the other font was a color font. So this wouldn't show. If I click OK, you're not gonna see anything. You can barely make it out, but it's black on top of black, so that's not really helpful. So while the type is highlighted, you've got a color picker at the very top. So that's different than your foreground color. This color picker at the very top is for your actual text. So when I click, that will let me pick any color I want, and I can see that it's picking that color, and I can go in any color in the spectrum. But one of the things I like to remind people, especially for photographers that aren't good at, like you're not a designer, you're not good at picking colors, your complementary colors that go with the photo. The best complementary colors that go with the photo are the colors that are in the photo because they're already there. So if you want to get around this, this constantly having to decide what color to use, just use a color that's already there. So for example, if I move my little picker outside of this color box onto the photo, you'll notice that it instantly changes into an eyedropper. And then I can sample any color I want. I can sample the color of her eyes. I can sample the color of her lipstick. I can sample her skin tone. I can make this, and of course that's going to match perfectly because it's the same color as she is. So that way I don't have to worry about, is this color going to work? Yes, it's going to work because it's in the photo already. All right, so just keep in mind that once you do that, you can click OK, and then you can continue working with the text. You can change the font again. So maybe I don't like that script. Let's try it. Oh, there was one that I liked earlier. That was not it. So this also keeps a running list of your most recently chosen fonts. So let's try that flirt script. And let's go ahead. And now I want to make it bigger. So when I pop down the list of point sizes, 72 is at the bottom of, that's the biggest one in the list. And I'm already bigger than 72. Well, how'd that happen? How'd I get to 122 if 72 is the max? Because 72 is not the max. 72 is the max in this list, but it's not the maximum point size you can do. So if you want something bigger than 72 or smaller than 6, you can just go in and type what you want. So I can say, make it 175 instead. And now it's 175. This is something that goes back since the beginning of the time with me. I can usually kind of guess, ballpark a point size, but I never can ever guess and be like spot on. Like, oh, it needs to be 198 and that'll be perfect. Nope, it's always 200. Oh, that's too big. 195. Oh, that's too small. 197. Oh, it's still a little too small. And then I finally get there. So rather than guessing your point size, it's easier for me to see it visually. So I've been, since the beginning of time, like back to InDesign 1.0, back in the 90s or early 2000s, using the keyboard shortcut to make my type bigger or smaller. So on the Mac, it would be Command-Shift. On the PC, it would be Control-Shift. And then your greater than symbol, which is above your period. So in between your M and your question mark, you have less than and greater than. So if I just hold down Command-Shift greater than, it'll gradually get bigger. And then I can see, oh, yeah, that's perfect size if I'm trying to fit it in somewhere. The other thing is that you'll notice that the point size did get bigger in the control panel. You can see it at the top. It's now 258. Again, I don't care about the number. I just want it to be the right size. But to the left of that, you'll see the actual icon for point size. Well, as soon as I hover over, so here I can change it, just type it in. As soon as I hover over that point size, I get a little double arrow pointing left and right. And that little double arrow is to let me know I have a scrubby slider there. And what a scrubby slider means is I can just go a lot faster scrubbing up or down. So the Command-Shift, Command-Shift greater than, less than is great when you're fine tuning. You're just trying to nudge it just a little bit bigger or smaller. But the scrubby slider is much faster. And then once you click OK, or click the commit button, then you'll see your text and you'll see that it's the size, the color, the font, and it creates a type layer. So on your layers panel, the minute you click the type tool and type something, well, the minute you click the type tool, it creates a layer. But the minute you type something, it will not only put what you typed on the canvas, but it'll also name the layer in whatever it is. So if you typed the whole sentence, the layer would be named that sentence. So that way it just makes it easier so that you can quickly identify your layers without you having to manually name them. So kudos to the Photoshop team. Whatever engineer did that, decades ago, just made life easier, because otherwise you would have type 1, type 2, type 3. So I rather it much say the word, that way I know which one it is. Now, I'm gonna come back and we're gonna do a lot more with type, but I'm gonna finish my thought process with Lightroom. So I opened up a Lightroom photo in Photoshop because I couldn't do this in Lightroom or Lightroom Classic. I got the text typed, font size, spec, color, everything the way I want it. The last thing I might want to do is before I leave here, I might want to grab the move tool because it is a layer, and I can just move it around. So I can get it in a position where I want it. And if I want it on top of her, on top of the photo, now again, her same color as her skin, gonna be hard to see on her. But if I want it anywhere else, I can move it, and I can even slightly put it over her hair because it's light enough to where that works. Now, once I get done messing with it, I got it exactly where I want it. It says what I want it to say. It's the right size, color, font, all that. That layer is going to stay there forever. So the question I see just popped up: how do I select the type after I've created it? Because I put the type tool. It's tricky to select the text, and I often end up with another type layer. I know it happens to all of us. So I'm going to show you a shortcut. So that's a great question. So the question was, how do I reselect the type? Let's say I saw a typo. I want to fix it, or I want to change the word. I want to do whatever. I want to add more text, whatever. So the instinctive thing to do, which isn't always, like he says, going to sometimes, depending on where you click, is going to cause a problem. Make sure you're on that layer. So number one, go to Layers panel. Make sure you're on the layer you want to change, because otherwise it will think you're trying to add new text. Number two, grab the type tool and just click anywhere, like right into the type, and it should give you the cursor so that you can go ahead and keep working. So if I want to type another S, I could change the type, so forth and so on. Now, that is, everything worked great. The type was nice and big. I only got one layer. It's not next to something else. It's not getting confused. So it's not trying to select something else or add new text. That worked out great. But what happens when it doesn't? Like you said, sometimes, depending on the situation, you might click it and it adds a new lorem ipsum instead of editing the one you had. So in that case, I just got out of the text. I just hit escape to get out of it. I'll show you the best way to select this type and get it every single time. On your layer, you know that you've got the ability to double click and change the layer name. Okay, but if you double click on the icon, the actual T, that will always select the text. No matter what, it could be behind something. You can't even see it. It will still always select the text. So now if I start typing or use my arrow keys, I'm in that text. So that's a surefire way to always be able to select the type. That way you can, I see another question here. That way you can always get to the type. Charlie's asking, Terry, can you remind us how to get rid of fuzzy or pixelating text? You shouldn't really have that anymore as a problem. Because back in the day, early on when Photoshop first implemented type, it was pixel based. So if you had a low resolution 72 dpi image and you typed anything on it, the type would also be 72 dpi. But type is vector now. So I'm not sure why you would be getting fuzzy type anymore. Anyway, but if you are still getting fuzzy type, let me know why. Sometimes my text has a dot and line under it like yours, and sometimes it doesn't. This is in different files. What's going on? If you mean this dot here, this is just the beginning of the type. Like that's a selection point, because like I said, it is vector. I can't imagine when you don't have it, unless, again, we're going to get into some more examples. So maybe that, depending on how you created the text, that might be giving you that. All right, that's new to me. You always learn something. Great, Nicholas, glad I could teach you something again. All right, so I'm gonna hit escape. That commits to it as well, or just gets out of making changes. Now I'm gonna go ahead and again, we're coming back to this. I'm just, again, finishing this from Lightroom thing. We'll get back into all kinds of text examples. I got another file that's open. We're gonna start from scratch. Okay, so let's finish this. So I'm gonna hit save. That will save it automatically, so no matter where it came from, whether it was a JPEG or a RAW file, this will automatically save it in whatever your default choice is in Lightroom. So defaulting, if you haven't changed anything, it's going to be a TIFF. I change mine, so Lightroom will always return, or Photoshop will always return a PSD, which is a Photoshop document, back to Lightroom. And whether it's TIFF or Photoshop, that layer is going to stay intact. So that way, if you ever decide to come back and re-edit this, your type is still a type layer. You can change it, delete it, hide it, turn it off, move it, whatever you need to do, always. So I'm going to close this now. We're coming back to that file, but let's go back to what happened in Lightroom. And just like any other Lightroom edit, here's my original RAW file, and here's my new PSD that it did an edit for. So my original RAW file, untouched, doesn't have any text on it, doesn't have any changes to it whatsoever. And then I have, there's the original, there's the one that I added text to. So I have the new one that Photoshop created, which is a layered file. So now if I decide, or I printed it out and I don't like the way it's on top of her hair, I need to move it over or make it smaller or whatever, all I have to do, right click, edit in Photoshop. Now this time I'm going to get a choice, because it's already been edited once. When I say edit in Photoshop, actually, no, I'm not going to get a choice because, oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm ahead of myself. I'm going to get a choice, like I said. I don't want to ever do this now. Normally, this would be my default choice. Always edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. But this is the one time I wouldn't want to do that. I want to edit the original PSD with the layer. Because if I leave it on this, it's going to make a new copy that's flattened. There will be no type layer. It will just be an image, and you'll get into Photoshop and you can't do anything to the text. So the one time I would tell you edit original is when it's already been created as a Photoshop file with layers. That's when you want to edit the original. So when I say edit the original, that should, saving metadata, don't know why it needs to save metadata, but it's saving metadata and it should just open it right back up. And let's see if it did already. Nope, it hasn't yet. It's thinking about it. There it is. Okay, so here it is with that layer still intact. Turn the layer on, turn the layer off. Free transform. Make the layer smaller. That's also another way to make it smaller without changing the point size. So I could make it an object that's smaller. Move it, hit OK, or hit commit, save it, close it. Once it finishes saving, I see it saving behind me. 49%, 50, 90%, almost. 90, it jumped from 50 to 90%. And now it's just sitting there. There we go, saved it. And now when I head back, that should be reflected. So here's the original again, that doesn't have any type. And then there's the one that I made smaller and moved up. So edit in Photoshop one time, make a copy if it's a JPEG. If it's a RAW file, it'll automatically make a copy. You end up with a copy no matter what. Add whatever you want, add as much text as you want, add as many layers as you want, retouch, do everything you want, save it. And then when you go to edit it again, just remember to choose edit original. So that way you're editing the one with the layers. How do I set a default that option? Which option? You can't change, you can't set a default to edit original because it's always going to give you that choice. But if you're talking about your PSD versus TIFF, that is done in your preferences, your settings. That is done in your external editing, and here's where it's done. So normally this would be on TIFF, I changed mine to PSD. Because again, functionally, there should be no difference. But I trust PSD because it's always going to support anything you do in Photoshop. Whereas TIFF should always support it, but maybe it won't one day. This way I'm covered. All right, that way, that's how I get PSDs back instead of TIFFs. That's it. All right, now, we kind of learned that what Lightroom can't do. We kind of learned, and by the way, one more thing, just so you can see it. If you did want to put text on top of a photo in Lightroom as a watermark, you can go in if you just kind of like just need to do something quick. I don't really count this as being quick, but if you just wanted to do it in Lightroom, you can say edit watermarks. And notice that my copyright comes up by default, and that's what's on the image. And this should be able to be moved. It can be made bigger. Yeah, I don't know that I could move it around. But anyway, if I wanted that to say her name instead, I could. And that's on top of the photo. And in terms of positioning, you do have some inset controls. So I can say move it over and move it up. And that's about it. That's as much control as I have. I can't just pick it up and move it around. I can change the font. I can change the font. I can change the color. I can change the alignment, which didn't really help me any. And that's about it. So again, very limited, because that's not what this was designed to do. This was designed to be a watermark, not text on the photo. All right. Now, that's it. We're done with Lightroom and Lightroom Classic, because that's about all I can do. What's the story behind having the rasterized layers in the first place? Again, they're like, I'm not in. Sometimes I feel like the questions are, you thought up the first part of the question and I wasn't in your head to be there to know what you're thinking. So when you say, what's the story behind having to rasterize layers in the first place? In reference to what? I didn't have to rasterize any layers. So I'm not sure what you're referring to because I wasn't in the first part of the conversation in your head. Okay, next up, let's go on. Tell me the rest of the conversation, then I can hopefully provide an answer. All right, so let's get into some regular type basics. Yep, more information needed. Now, what I've done is I've created just a multi-artboard Photoshop file just to save me time. And let's grab the type tool. And so again, we already know we can click and type. But here's another thing that a lot of people don't know is that you can also click and drag. So if I click and drag for the, let's say I'll extend it all the way out here, then that's going to give me the lorem ipsum as far out as I typed it. And by the way, you might be asking, well, why is it always giving you that font? Because for every Photoshop file you work in, whatever type you choose last, that's the default until you change the type. So it's going to keep giving me this font in this file until I change it. Then the next time I create a text box, it'll be in that font. So in other words, the font choice you made is sticky until you change it. And therefore, that's why it keeps giving me this Trojan color. All right, so anyway, I'm going to change the font to something else. Let's just use Myriad because it's a nice clean font. Myriad Pro, regular. All right, we'll use that. All right, so now I got a nice clean font, and I'm just going to go ahead and start typing. Why do you have to rasterize layers? Why can't you do everything on a layer without having to rasterize it? Only because there are certain operations, like for example, let's say you want to run a filter on the type. Well, some filters can't be run on vectors. So it depends on what the operation is. So the filter is only pixel based. It needs pixels. That's why you'd have to rasterize the type. So usually if you're rasterizing any layer, it's because you're trying to do something that doesn't work on vectors. Hopefully that explains it. All right, so let's say once upon a time, there was a question in the chat about raster. Okay, raster. There we go. All right, so now I've got my type typed, and you notice that the box I created is got handles on it. So this will also control the wrapping, this is called text wrap, when the text wraps around. And so I can make the box bigger to where it fits, where it doesn't fit, so forth and so on. So if you're designing something and you're trying to make the type fit in a certain area, then you might drag a box out first. That way you're confining the text to fit in that box. But then again, keep in mind that if you don't show all the text, you'll get this little plus sign at the bottom right, reminding you that you've got more text that we can't see. So when that plus sign is there, that's an immediate indication, oh, there's some more text that's not being shown because the box isn't big enough or the text isn't small enough, whichever way your brain works. And there it is. Okay, so now I've got the type. I did it in Myriad Pro regular. It's 122 points because remember the size of the last thing I did was 122 points. I can now do all the things I talked about. So I can go in and I can highlight the text and make it smaller. So let's say make it 100 points instead. Okay, now it's smaller. I could change the font to, instead of Myriad, I can change it to Minion, which is this Myriad's like sister. Minion Pro regular. There we go. And by the way, I just came up here and started typing. Now, when you pop this list down, you see the names of fonts. And this is let me give you a little quick font menu lesson. Number one, the stars on the left-hand side are so you can pick favorites. So for example, I really like Ephra. So there's Ephra. So I'm going to go ahead and click the star next to it so it shows up in my favorites. That's number one. Number two, if you twirl the font down, it will show you all the styles of the font. So for example, one of the common fonts we've known for years is Helvetica or Times Roman. Those are fonts that have been around for decades. Times Roman is the font, bold, regular, italic, medium, heavy. Those are all styles of that font. And so professional typography is a font and a style. It's not a font and you click a button that says bold. That's word processing. That's back in the day when it just made a fake bold. But if the font has a bold, it will be a style. If it doesn't have a bold, because some fonts don't have all the styles, clicking B is not an option in professional work anymore. So you either have to choose a font with a bold or not. Need to add text wrap options in Photoshop like InDesign. Okay, I couldn't agree with you more. Next up, the type of font that it is over here. So the Creative Cloud logo is letting me know that those are Adobe fonts I got from Creative Cloud. TT stands for TrueType. Those are TrueType fonts that probably came in the operating system because the operating system defaults to TrueType. O is Opentype fonts that may have not come from Creative Cloud because all Creative Cloud fonts are Opentype. But if it just see the O, that means I didn't get it from Creative Cloud. I already had it. And O variable, which is a cool new kind of font. It's a variable font, which we'll get into what that is in a minute. And SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. I'm not sure why you care if the font was Scalable Vector Graphics or not, but it's a type of font. What you won't see here anymore, as of recent, like in the last couple months, you won't see an A, because those are Adobe Type 1 fonts, and we no longer support those anymore. End of story. It's an old format. We don't support it anymore. If you have some Type 1 fonts and you really love them and need them, there are converters out there that will let you convert them into Opentype. All right, how do I add free fonts to Photoshop and Lightroom? You no longer, like that was back in the 90s where you added fonts to a program. If you have fonts, you just add them to your operating system and your programs will see them. Your applications will see them. So if you have a free font, install it in your operating system and it'll be there in Photoshop and in Illustrator and so forth and so on. And Lightroom Classic won't really do much with it. Adobe killed my fonts. Well, some things we do move on with, and that's one that we did. All right, next up. But yeah, I would just use a converter and convert them. There's some free ones online. So we didn't kill your fonts, we just killed the format. All right, so you see a sample. That's the last thing over here, and that will show you just kind of what the sample looks like in the font. But here's another thing that's going on in the background you didn't see. When I choose the list, what's better for me is to actually see what the font will look like on my actual text. So as I hover over the type, I can actually see it and see if it's a good fit for what I'm doing. I kind of like that font. What is that? Adorn Condensed Sand. I'm going to go ahead and mark that as a favorite. I kind of like that one. Anyway, you can just choose it that way. Now, everything I've shown you is kind of visual, kind of logical, but what you may not think to do, because remember I came up here and I highlighted and I just start typing. Our brains would think, oh, I typed the name of the font, that's going to make it come up. So for example, if I wanted Ephra, yep, EFF, Ephra comes up. Great. But what's also there are the styles, bold, heavy, heavy italics, so forth and so on. So maybe I just want a light font and I don't know which one it is, or I don't even remember the name of it. So what you can do instead is just go in and type the word light. And that will show you all your light fonts until you see the one you want. You could type the word, I did it earlier, script. Show me all my script fonts. I don't necessarily know which one I want until I see it. But I know I want it to be a script, something decorative. Show me all my heavy fonts. I want it to be nice and thick. I don't know which heavy font I want, but there's some nice thick ones there. So that's another way to use this menu, just so you can, yes, blinded by the light. Just so you can, yeah, Comic Sans should be enough for everyone, I agree, and Papyrus. But just so you can not have to worry about the name of the font, but just the style. So if I'm looking for fonts that are bold, there are going to be tons of those. I can just say, show me all the ones that are bold and show me what they would look like. Show me all the ones that are italic. And that will show me all my italics. Okay, so we kind of beat that to death. There's one more thing we're going to do there, but we're going to do a little bit later. So I'm just going to go ahead and say, show me, show me the lights again. Show me the light ones. And I'm going to use a Veer light. Oh, nope. We're not going to use that one. Sorry. We're not going to use that one. Let me do it one more time. We're not going to use that one because it's a true type font. We want to use our fonts we like. Our Creative Cloud fonts. There we go. So I choose the Fira Sans. F-I-R-A Sans. That's the name of the font. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. If not, oh well. Okay, so now we get to learn some typography controls that every person should know. Now, I noticed that no matter which font I picked, the type looks a little like the letters looked a little spaced out from each other. That's called kerning, space in between individual letters, tracking the space between all the letters and words or highlighted selections. And that's probably because at some point I adjusted it and Photoshop remembered it, and everything I type from now on is going to be that spacing. So I'm going to highlight this text, and you're going to see a big difference. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my my type controls, which is this button up here. Toggle your controls on. And that will bring up your character and paragraph panel. The character panel is where you go in and specify. Oh, I was wrong. That is just the spacing on that type. Anyway, the character controls is where you specify more about the font. So we saw the point size. We know where we got that. But leading and the space between the letters here is the metrics and the variable space. So, and this is your vertical scaling. Ah, that's what it is. I knew it was something off about this. The horizontal scaling is at 80% instead of 100. So it wasn't that the space was too small. It was that the the letters were too thin, if that makes sense. So I just basically put them back to 100, which is what it should be. All right, so, and everything else is good. Okay, so that is, now that it's back to the way that font looks normally at 100% auto, metrics, 0, 100%, 100%, that is the standard for that font. And if I pick any other font, we should see that standard as well. So if I go in now and I pick a different light font, we'll go into, I don't want to use a variable yet. We'll go into this one. Yeah, that's the way that font normally looks. It's just the way it's designed. So again, as long as everything is at 100 and 0 or 100 and what auto or what it's supposed to be, that is the normal style for that font. Now, with that said, I may want to, and I'll give you an example that's a nice visual example to do. So let's move this over, for example, for a minute. Let's just click the type tool one more time. And I'm going to give you an example of when you would want to do this. So let's do, for those of you who are, might remember this brand, Tivo. Tivo makes DVRs. And I know most people don't even use DVRs anymore. But anyway, they make DVRs. So let's give it a font that's closer to what Tivo's font is, something like Minion. Minion Pro regular should be closer to what their font looks like. There we go. And maybe nope, it doesn't have a light, so that's it. All right, I'm going to make this bigger. Just going to stretch it out. There we go. Hold down the shift key to not stretch it. And there we go. Okay, so now we have Tivo. And right off the bat, what throws this off is they put a capital V in the middle of their word. So it's capital T, lowercase I, capital V, lowercase o. And on auto and 0 and all the default settings, that's what the type engine gives us. But the Tivo logo, if you looked at it, that O is closer to the V. The V is closer to the I. So these are manual adjustments in the kerning that the designer of that logo did. So if I click between the V and the O, and I hold down my Option key on Mac and my Alt key on Windows, and I press, this is the arrow keys on the keyboard, so left, right, up, down. If I press my left arrow, it jumped out at first because it went from metrics back to like the default. I can move that O closer. And again, I'd have to look at the logo to know how close, but I can move it, I can even have them overlap. I can move them as close as I need to, as far or far away as I need to. Whatever it takes to make that type look the way it's supposed to look. So it probably looks something closer to that. So same thing over here, it's just adjusting between these two characters. Something closer to that. And just to round it out, we'll do the I as well. It's probably something like that. That probably looks more like the Tivo logo because the designer, the typographer, made some adjustments to the kerning to make it look tighter, cleaner. So let's turn that layer, let's lock that in. Let's turn that layer off for a second. So we're just going to turn the Tivo layer off. We're going to come back to this once upon a time text. Move it back over here just so we can see it better. And now we're going to talk about leading. Leading's the space between the lines. So when I double click on this and I highlight all the text, oh, there's more text we can't see. There we go. Now we can see it all. I highlight all the text. I can do the same thing. I can hold down my Option left key and that will adjust the tracking for all the spacing. So if I don't want to do it individually, I just want the whole thing to be tighter, I can do it that way. However, and by the way, you can see the value change. So now it's, even though I went back a couple times, I didn't go back to what it used to be. So now it's -20. If I want it to be back to what it used to be, I would set it to 0. So 0 is the default. All right, so anyway, Now that's the space going this way. I want to do the space going this way. I want to tighten the lines up. So same thing, Option or Alt key, up and down arrow. Now the first time you do it, it's probably going to look weird because it went from auto to you making adjustments. But just keep doing it. Sometimes the text will be, all the lines will jump together like they're on top of each other. Keep spacing them apart. So it just depends on what the original was and what you're setting it to now. Now, this is getting uncomfortably close for me, a little too tight, but it just gives you an idea of what you can and can't do. So that's way, way, way too tight for me. But just giving you an idea that that's how you can get the text to be less space in between the lines. So in a typewriter, on a original word processor, you use terminology like single space, 1.5 space, double space. And that was the space between the lines because it was literally, those were all your choices you had. You double spaced it, hit return twice, or you 1.5 space if you had a word processor, but that's about it. Now you know you can adjust it to whatever you need it to be. It's not about line, 1 or 2 or 1.5. You can make it whatever you want. If I did need to make it 2 times the line space, I would just change the number to 200, or double the amount of spacing, and that whatever that number would be. That wouldn't be 200. It might be 20. Anyway, whatever the number would be to give me 2 times the space, that would do it. All right. Now, while we're at it, since I mentioned this before, you also have vertical scale and horizontal scale. That's what I was trying to remember the name of it. So right now, at 100%, that is the exact height that font was designed at. If I change it to 150, the letters get taller. Again, the leading didn't adjust, so I would have to adjust the leading. Oop. Sorry, hang on. Oh, because I'm on it. It was adjusting this. So I'm still highlighted. Okay, there we go. Okay, now we can go down. So now I need to go back. I need to space it out more because I made the type 50% taller. And again, same thing here. If you need the type to be wider or skinnier, I could make it, for example, 90% skinnier. So you can literally fit text any way you need to in most cases. Unless you're just making it too small, it can't be read. But in most cases, you can make it fit your scenario. So Maurice is asking, how do we do photo inside of text? And that's an example I have towards the end, and we're almost at the end. So remind me at the wrap up to make sure I show that if I forget. Okay. So we covered those things. Now, I think I covered all the things there I wanted to do. I just wanted to give you a few Opentype options, because if you're working with Opentype fonts, these are the kinds of things you would need to know. If you were typing 1/2 by default, that's how you type it. And I just want to make sure that I come down here and make sure that layer is selected. All right, if I go here, and I just want to make sure also that these are off. There we go. You would type it like this. You would type 1/2. But again, that's typewriter. That's old-fashioned. That's not the way 1/2 looks in professional books and typography. It would be, the 1 would be slightly over the slash over the 2. So how would you do that in modern typography such as Photoshop or InDesign? I'm going to highlight all of these actually. I'm going to highlight these first 2. And notice they're 1/2 and 3/8. If I pop over to the flyout menu, and I think there's an option for it down here too. Yeah, there it is. There's a fraction. You could either do it from the flyout menu, Opentype, and there's one called fractions, or you can just use the button on the character panel. Let me pop out of that. The button on the character panel will do the same thing. I just click fraction, and it knows to make that a fraction, a decent looking fraction. So 13/16, that's not a standard fraction, that's not a standard font, but Opentype does the right thing. Same thing over here, although that one doesn't look as good. Over here, this one, such a weird number. And that one did right. I don't know if the spacing's off on this one. This one didn't come out right. It could have been that something else is there. Hang on. I'm not sure what happened to my 13/16, but it works. Same thing with second, third, fourth, first, so forth and so on. These are called ordinals. And this is the button here that says first. That changes them into proper looking ordinals. Okay. This is one of my favorite features inside of working with text. Now, I turned on an option in my Photoshop preferences. Let me get out of that. My Photoshop preferences, I turned on, why can't I get to my settings? There we go. Settings, I think it's under type. I turned on enable type layer glyph alternates. This is now off by default. I turned it back on because I know why they turned it off, because it's annoying when it's popping up all the time. So that's why it's off by default. But if you like it, you can turn it on and leave it on. And let me show you what this means. If I highlight this text, and I change it to my best example ever of alternates, Bickham Script Pro, and I make it nice and big, and I can change the color too while we're at it. Let's make it a nice green. There we go. When I highlight an individual character like the letter S, that little thing, that little box popped up at the bottom right. That's the checkbox we turned on. If you don't turn on that checkbox, you won't get this little box. You can still do this in the Glyphs panel. There's an actual panel called Glyphs. And if you hit the arrow, that will take you to the Glyphs panel. It popped up over there. There it is. But what this does is if I highlight a letter, it will give me the alternates for that letter. So if it has any, not every font has them. Not every Opentype font has them. So I like this S better. So I can just double click on that S and it changes it to that S. I can highlight the letter B. It shows me the B's. So it's like that game show. Show me the B's. Show me the letter A. Show me the Y's. All right, I'm going to make it smaller again because that B really got big. There we go. And so any character, if there's alternates for it, you can choose your alternates. So some of them will look better than others depending on the word. So some of these are designed to be at the beginning or the end. Like that doesn't look right, but just to let you know you have the choice. So for example, if I highlight the letter L, maybe I like this L better. And maybe I only want to design one L to be that way instead of both of them. So this way you can get some pretty interesting looking logos that are text-based or type that no one else will do because they don't change the alternates. So you will get a custom design looking piece of text just by switching a few characters around. All right, last but not least, and here it is for the person that asked, I think it was Maurice, how do we do photo inside of text? So if I go down to this layer, not that layer, where's that layer? Oh, there's clipping mask, there we go. I have, if you look at the layers panel, I have the image on top of the text layer. So the text layer is there behind it. If I turn off the image, you can see the, maybe you can't. Oh, probably because it's white text. Anyway, there's some white text there. All right, so what I'm going to do is just simply, all you do is put your image layer on top, and then you go to your image layer, and you choose, actually, I think you need to choose both layers. I can't remember. Choose both layers just for safety, and you go in and choose, nope, top layer. Never mind, don't do both. Top layer, and choose Create Clipping Mask, and that will do this. So that will give you your image inside your text, which was the question. Now, the if the text is still live, the image is still live. So if I go in and I move the image around, I'm moving the image around inside the text. If I grab the text layer, I'm moving the text around. If I grab the type tool and I change it to great, it changes. So everything remains editable, no rasterizing. There it is. All right, folks, I hope you got something out of today. I hope this was helpful for you. I am just about out of time, but that is what I wanted to cover, mainly for working with type inside of Photoshop and what you can and can't do unless out of Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. And again, any of this can be done on top of an image. Like most of these examples I did were not on top of an image, just so we can concentrate on the type. But you can add as many type layers as you need, change as many things as you need about them, and add them to as many images as you need to, and away you go. So with that said, cheers everyone, thanks for watching, have a great weekend, and go work with type inside of Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, not so much Lightroom or Lightroom Classic. Bye everybody.